The views and opinions expressed on the following program are those of the host and guests and do not necessarily represent those of any organization, including One Generation Away.
The freedom of a people to choose its leaders is the root of liberty.
Keep alive this experiment in liberty.
Liberty, in case you've forgotten, is the soul's right to breathe.
Government should be very minimal in protecting liberty.
Peace cannot be purchased at the cost of liberty.
The sturdy ground of liberty.
Liberty once lost is lost forever.
Fight for their liberty and for our security.
Guarantees individual liberty.
This great republic, born alone in liberty.
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 Just how much do you want liberty?
This is Liberty Nation with Tim Donner,
a production of LibertyNation.com.
Cutting through the double talk, taking on the topics, going after what the politicians really mean, and making it all clear. For your freedom and your liberty. Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Trump signs two major trade deals. Republicans gear up to exonerate the president in a trial that will take three of the leading Democratic presidential candidates off the campaign trail right before the first contest. The latest presidential debate was a flop and ended with a public feud between warring socialists. Was it the worst week ever for the Democrats? Welcome back into Liberty Nation Radio, a production of LibertyNation.com and heard from coast to coast on the Radio America Network. We will break down a week where things seem to just come apart at the seams for the fractured Democratic Party. We'll chronicle the open panic on the left and bring on LibertyNation.com political columnist Joe Schaeffer to sort through the Democrats' wreckage. And I will tell you who the Democrats should nominate for president if they're serious about winning or at least regaining respectability. Plus, LibertyNation.com legal affairs editor Scott Cosenza jumps on board for Talkin' Liberty.
Say what? Say what? Say what? One more time.
We commence the proceedings with our signature segment, Say What, where we roll out a virtual assembly line of wacky, astonishing, damnable, and ultimately revealing things uttered by politicians and the chattering class. Democrats had one final chance to hit the debate stage before the first votes are cast in Iowa on February 2nd, but it seems none of the candidates took advantage of the opportunity to separate him or herself from the rest of the crowded pack in a race that has one guy running at the top of national polls and other candidates leading in some of the earliest contests. And as if the disappointing debate performances were not enough, the evening was punctuated by a hot mic episode right after the debate ended, which has now turned into an open internet feud between the top two candidates from the socialist wing of the party, Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders. Warren had earlier in the week accused Bernie of saying a woman couldn't win the presidency this year. Bernie denied it. And when he went to shake Warren's hand after the debate, she pulled back her hand, and then this.
I think you called me a liar on national TV.
What?
I think you called me a liar on national TV.
Let's not do it right now. You want to have that discussion, we'll have that
Anytime.
discussion. You called me. You told me. All right, let's not do it now.
I don't want to get in the middle of it. I just want to say hi, Bernie.
Yeah, good. Okay.
That was the hapless Tom Steyer sticking his nose in at the end before being summarily dismissed by Bernie. So in a debate where these presidential candidates were supposed to make their final pitch to voters in Iowa, the only headline coming out of it was war between two socialists. In a week where Trump scored more victories with the first phase of his China trade deal and the U.S.-Mexico-Canada trade agreement. Add to that Nancy Pelosi celebrating an impeachment nobody cares about by handing out impeachment pens from a silver tray after the articles of impeachment were signed and sent to the Senate for a trial she has no chance of winning. So to say it was a disastrous week for Democrats would be the understatement of the young decade. And this is not just me saying this. The chorus of disappointment and even despair from the left after Tuesday's debate was unmistakable all over the airwaves. Start with Van Jones, self-professed communist, but also a keen and honest political observer on CNN.
I'm thinking people I think about every day, places like Oakland and Philadelphia, whatever. Can any of those people get excited about what I saw tonight? And I don't see it. And I have to be honest about it. I don't see it. Tonight, for me, was dispiriting. The Democrats going to have to do better than what we saw tonight. There was nothing I saw tonight that would be able to take Donald Trump out.
Meanwhile, over at MSNBC, wailing and gnashing of teeth from longtime leftist rabble-rouser, the Reverend Al Sharpton, for the entirely uninspired display of what's supposed to be the best Democrats have to offer.
If you can't take on and take charge in the debate, what gives people the confidence you can do that with Donald Trump? You cannot stand up and just go along to get along and think you're going to be the next president. You don't become champion by just saying, I'll get by this round. You got to take the title. And I didn't see anybody on the stage last night or in the ring that really said, I'm taking charge. I can be president. I can take on Donald Trump.
Now, Van Jones and Al Sharpton are avowed leftists, but the other concentration of Trump hatred is among the so-called never-Trumpers, Republicans and conservatives who've made their bed with the left because even though Trump has done the things they've claimed to support for their entire lives, they just don't like his personality. Foremost among them, Joe Scarborough on MSNBC, who begrudgingly admitted that those vaunted Trump rallies are a whole lot more inspiring to ordinary Americans than the naysayers sitting around the cameras harping at the president or the Democrats running for president.
The people around the table are scolds. Everybody that's watching this guy, it's like Sinatra at the Sands in '65. It's like you said, coming on, happy warrior.
He's having a blast
That's
out
what
there.
they're seeing. Democrats have to understand that, and they have to figure out how to meet him on the battlefield, political battlefield, and take him on. I saw no evidence last night that anybody up there knew how to do that.
Now, last week, we played you the comments of Michael Moore, far-left filmmaker and keen observer, who called Trump's win in 2016 early on. And you'll recall his remarks on how Trump is even stronger this time around. Well, this week, Moore lamented the other side of the equation, the weakness of Democrats and the feud between Bernie and Liz Warren, which will have drastic repercussions.
The night that happened, my first thought was they will mark this day, January 13th, as the day Donald Trump was reelected. Because once again, the Democrats, the liberals, the left, couldn't get it together, couldn't figure out, instead of so happy to get right in there and fight each other like this. And I'm like, when are we ever going to learn? This is on us. This is not on the Russians. It's not on the Republicans. It's on the Democratic Party for not getting its act together and not using its head.
And there you have it, from the left, about the left. Open panic about their chances of taking down Donald Trump in a party that has clearly lost its way. But what if Bernie Sanders can somehow prevail, win the nomination, and beat Trump? Well, socialist influence would overtake the country more than ever, but what would that mean? Well, if you want to be scared, really scared, listen to a Bernie Sanders field organizer in Iowa, Kyle Jurek, caught on camera by undercover filmmaker James O'Keefe, and I'll warn you, some of it is truly shocking.
The only thing that works, the only thing that fascists understand is violence. So the only way that you can confront them is with violence.
So if Trump gets reelected, what?
And cities burn.
We're gonna make 1978 look like a f***ing Girl Scout f***ing cookout.
What does that mean?
Remember what happened when McGovern got f***ed in Chicago in 1978? Riots. People getting beaten by the cops. The cops are gonna be the ones that are getting f***ing beaten in Milwaukee.
So many people have suicided themselves that have been related to the Clintons in some way or another. It's insane.
Kill the Clintons?
Baby, revolution.
Kill the Clintons?
Revolution is on.
Let me tell you something about this revolution.
No, we don't got to kill the Clintons. We'll make them kill themselves.
How's that?
Reign of terror.
Go walk into that MSNBC studios, drag those up by their hair, and light them on fire in the streets.
That is the dark underbelly of the socialists who want to take over the country. And again, that was no rank-and-file Bernie supporter. It was a campaign field organizer for the Sanders campaign in Iowa. So what are the Democrats to do? Is there anyone in their ranks who can beat President Trump? Well, when we return, I'm going to tell you who their best choice would be and why. And spoiler alert, it's not one of the top-tier candidates.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Where can you find honest political commentary with sobering analysis, accountability, deconstructing threats to our liberty, and boldly reporting the truth? Subscribe to LibertyNation.com YouTube channel, where facts matter.
We believe that all men are entitled to blessings of liberty.
This is Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Given the state of the economy and the many advantages of incumbency afforded any chief executive, President Trump remains a solid bet to be reelected, and very possibly by a larger margin than in 2016. I wrote that prediction of 350 electoral votes for Trump back in July of last year. But the Democrats have to nominate somebody to take him on, and the problem is that for the longest time it's been almost impossible to envision which, if any, of the Democrats' 29 declared presidential candidates could actually step up and distinguish him or herself as the clear choice to take on and beat Donald Trump. But now that we're just days away from the first votes being cast and the field has narrowed substantially, this week's final debate before the Iowa caucuses, disappointing as it was, may just have left us with the answer, not to the question of who will win the nomination, but who should win it, if the Democrats are serious about repairing their tattered image and fielding a candidate who'll not scare off swing voters and can be competitive in the heartland which drove Trump's victory 4 years ago. First, let's enumerate the fatal flaws of 5 of the 6 candidates on the stage Tuesday evening in Des Moines. Joe Biden, who as the nominee could count on being savaged by Trump more than ever for the transparent corruption involving his son, predictably stumbled through multiple incoherent responses in Iowa, sounding dazed and confused. Biden's only real credential is that he's got name recognition and he's not Trump. But the consistent chatter around the swamp and the heartland and people in the know is that Joe Biden is simply not up to the task. Bernie Sanders, with a slightly less angry countenance than usual on Tuesday night, and Elizabeth Warren straining to sound authentically working class by referring often to her mama and her days growing up in Oklahoma, those two burnished their well-established socialist credentials, but nominating a socialist in the midst of a years-long economic upturn like we're in now would promise to produce a decisive victory, if not a landslide, for Trump. And now, of course, Sanders and Warren are in a nasty rhetorical war, Warren claiming Bernie said a woman can't win for president, and Bernie denying it, each calling the other a liar. Pete Buttigieg, military veteran, pulled the "it's personal to me" card on the Iran confrontation as he regaled the debate audience with stories of going off to war, while at the same time dropping in enough phrases like environmental justice to satisfy the rabid base and enough religious references to comfort voters who care about such things, Mayor Pete is a skilled politician, but young, very young, and faced with the issues of being gay and a striking inability to attract critical black support. Mayor Pete has impressively punched wildly above his weight up to now, but he's clearly a candidate for the future rather than the present. Then there's billionaire Tom Steyer, not to be confused with alternative billionaire candidate Michael Bloomberg, who is ignoring the first four contests. Steyer spouted a succession of textbook Trump-hating, globalist-loving bromides looking every bit the bug-eyed wooden soldier. Whatever talent made Steyer wealthy in business has clearly not translated to the political sphere. He will, like Bloomberg, carpet bomb Super Tuesday states with all manner of political ads, but he has no chance. And that leaves the one candidate on the stage in this week's 7th presidential debate who has, if only by default, established herself as the most prudent choice to represent the Democratic Party against Trump, and that is Amy Klobuchar. Now, let's be clear that this does not mean the party will nominate the senior senator from Minnesota, only that they should. She's in 5th place right now, but she offers several intrinsic qualities that the others don't. She's admittedly uninspiring, but in a party that cares more about beating Trump than anything else, it shouldn't matter. Most importantly, she carries far less baggage than her rivals, and she's established sufficient street cred by plowing sort of methodically and competently through these 7 debates. As a woman in a party given over to identity politics, she'd be a showpiece for Democratic diversity. Importantly, Klobuchar, though, has presented as the most likable of the contenders, the anti-Trump. She's unthreatening, unlike the socialist candidates, and has consistently hewed to conventional liberal, now known as moderate, positions on critical issues, while turning away from radical notions of reform. This is in sharp contrast to her competitor in the so-called moderate lane, Joe Biden, who has unconvincingly reversed his historical positions on multiple issues in openly pandering to progressives. Amy Klobuchar is clearly best positioned to compete with Trump in the heartland because she's an authentic Midwesterner, unlike Biden, who touts his everyday Joe image after spending almost half a century as a poster child for the D.C. establishment. She'd be the underdog against Trump, to be sure, but an upset victory by an amiable woman running as a palatable centrist, an acceptable not Trump, is not nearly as inconceivable as a victory by Biden or Warren or Sanders or Buttigieg. The best Democrats can hope for in trying to rid the nation of a man they believe to be evil is to remove all that substantial background noise surrounding the other contenders and make their case that the election is about Trump versus simply not Trump. And there's no better choice on that field of play than Amy Klobuchar. Quick break, and then we're back to see if LibertyNation.com political columnist Joe Schaeffer agrees with this assessment as we assess the state of play for both the presidential race and impeachment.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Far more important than my political future and far more important than yours, the well-being of our country.
This is Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Well, we are now finally just days away from the first votes being cast in the Democratic presidential race, with the Iowa caucuses set for February 3rd, 2 weeks from Monday. And the latest debate among the survivors of a field that's seen no less than 29 candidates come and go hardly helped to sort the wheat from the chaff. As we've discussed today, the reviews were dismal for the 6 performers on stage for the Democrats' 7th debate. LibertyNation.com political columnist Joe Schaeffer has been on top of the race from the start, and he joins us now. Hello, Joe. Thanks for joining us. So, Joe, in the last segment, I laid out the case, as I did on LibertyNation.com, that the optimal nominee for the Democrats, taking into account all factors, would be none of the so-called top tier, but rather Amy Klobuchar. Now, forgetting for a moment whether she can actually win, would you agree with the assessment that Senator Amy Klobuchar would be the best choice for the Democrats?
Well, it's an interesting argument, that's for sure. I read your article on Liberty Nation, and I fully understand the point you're making. I just don't think the grassroots Democrats are with you on this. You basically said she's the one by default. She hasn't shown overwhelming flaws. She has sent out the message, and she did it in a debate Tuesday very clearly, that while she's not establishment, she's not going to upset the apple cart. She came out saying she'll leave troops in the Middle East. She was more middle of the road on trade. She was sending a message to the Democrat moderates that she's not going to upset them, and that may make a good general election sense. The problem is she's got to get through a primary first, and there's a rabid progressive base that doesn't want someone who's not going to upset the apple cart. They want radical change. That's why I don't think Joe Biden is a real front runner. I don't think he has a chance, actually. And I think it hurt Amy Klobuchar strategy-wise to try to appeal to the middle of the road in a party that is so clearly not middle of the road. They would actually be better off, the Democrats, going McGovern. I know it sounds crazy, but that's a direction they want to go. And maybe it'll be a slap in the face to them reality-wise if their progressive candidate gets buried like McGovern did. But I just feel the Democrats want to veer away from the old uniparty politics like the Republicans did in 2016 with Trump. That's why I think Biden has no chance. Klobuchar, by signaling that to that camp that, hey, I'm not going to upset things too much, I just believe that's going to upset Democrat voters all the more because they want to move away from that. And I really, truly believe losing an election is not as important to them as moving away from that old Hillary, Biden, old establishment dinosaur brand of politics. I truly feel Democrats are dying to get away from that.
Yeah, I think if you look at their behavior, it would suggest that they would rather lose than go the same route that they lost with in 2016 to at least lay the groundwork for the future, starting with 2024. Now, Joe, let's talk about the growing feud between Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders, which is sucking up all the oxygen in the political room. They clashed over Bernie's supposed statement that a woman could not become president this year, and then called each other liars on a hot mic when the debate was over. Wasn't it inevitable that these two socialists would have to part ways and go after each other?
Absolutely. I 100% agree with you on that. This is two alpha progressives arguing over this, fighting over the same turf. So this was inevitable eventually. I'm not sure Warren comes out looking good early on because she was the aggressor. I mean, that hot mic moment wasn't good for her. But I thought she ate Bernie's lunch earlier in the debate when they were talking about trade and foreign policy, which was the only interesting part of the whole night, the first 45 minutes. And Bernie was kind of playing it safe. He was touting his old record opposing the Iraq war. But Elizabeth Warren was throwing haymakers. She was talking about endless war being a form of corruption and, the revolving door with defense contractors and the Pentagon. That kind of populist language, that's the red meat that kind of socialist, progressive, democratic voter wants. And it was very surprising to me to see Bernie not doing that. And then Warren goes ahead. She's doing fine. And then she shoots herself in the foot, bringing up the whole woman thing, the argument with what Bernie said to her. I thought it made her look petty. I thought it made her look like she's running on gender. And she kind of undermined all the good work she did earlier. But I was really surprised that Bernie's not more just openly populist. I expect him to do that in the future, but he didn't do it Tuesday, and I thought he lost that first 45 minutes because of that.
Okay, so the rubber is really about to meet the road when it comes to this Democratic presidential race. And if you add up Bernie and Warren's votes, that's more than a third of the primary voters, almost 40%, compared to about 25% or so for Biden. Doesn't one of Bernie or Warren have to drop out of this race for a progressive to win the nomination?
Yes, I agree with that. And I think we both know they're in it for the long run. And the both of them, this is going to be a major problem for the Democrats. The only way it's going to be decided is some decisive voting. And frankly, I don't see that happening. I think the worst nightmare for Democrats is this thing being strung out all the way to the convention. And that very well may happen. We have this undecided mediocrity right now, and we're all saying, wow, this is really bad. Imagine if we have it in June. And I think that is going to happen, and Democrats are really going to be in a tough place there. And the progressives clamoring for change, they're not going to have their clear change candidate. It's going to be a really mess for them, and that's going to be great for Trump.
Now, Joe Biden looked, in my view, worse than ever in this last debate. He was stumbling and bumbling, looking dazed and confused, actually saying at one point that the working and middle classes are getting clobbered, killed by the Trump economy. Now, he's not looking very strong in either Iowa or New Hampshire. If he finishes below the top in both the first two contests, will an expected victory in the third contest in South Carolina be enough to salvage his candidacy?
Unfortunately for Democrats, I would say yes. I mean, how can you be worse when you've been a disaster all along on the campaign trail? This has just been a horrible campaign he's running, and we all pretty much believe he's a phony frontrunner, that it's just name recognition. But like you said, he is looking strong in South Carolina. I think he's going to do just well enough to hang around through the whole thing, which is the worst thing for Democrats. He's not going to get the nomination, and he's not going to go away. And we're just going to have this muddled mediocrity that we've had throughout all of 2019 and into the new year. And Biden is just I think he's going to be an anchor around the primary process because he's not going to lose decisively enough to go away. And he's just going to keep making these gaffes that make the whole process look ridiculous.
Hasn't Nancy Pelosi tanked her own party's chances of winning the presidency with her impeachment, which has now produced a Senate trial starting this week, which will take three of the top contenders off the campaign trail for weeks so they can serve as Senate jurors, just as the race is starting to reach critical mass? I mean, this is like a Three Stooges act, is it not?
Yeah, I agree with that. They're an unfocused party. They really have no true leader. I've never thought Nancy Pelosi is leading anything. When she had to make that deal with AOC and the younger radicals just to keep her precious speakership, she was just basically saying, just let me hang on for a few more years. But she's not driving any kind of boat. So she kind of got forced into this impeachment thing, which I think she knew was not a good idea. So she has to see it through. And the whole thing's veering out of control. You're right. It's going to hurt the presidential candidates. They don't seem to care. It's muddled, it's unfocused, and all of it is going to help Trump. I've never understood why they thought the fact that a Democratic House impeached him was going to hurt Trump so much. In this day and age, people just took it for a cynical political gesture, which, of course, is all it is.
Okay, Joe, well, we're going to catch up with great regularity throughout this presidential election year as we look ahead to Iowa. We look forward to seeing you again very shortly. Thanks.
Thank you.
That is Joe Schaeffer, political columnist for LibertyNation.com. Quick break, and then we're back with Talkin' Liberty.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
And now we welcome you to the portion of Liberty Nation Radio which we entitle Talkin' Liberty, as we welcome back our regular contributor, constitutional lawyer, and LibertyNation.com legal affairs editor, Scott Cosenza. Hello, Scott.
Hello, Tim.
I deliberately left out the guardian of individual liberty part just so that I could separate it out and make it stand alone, because that's what you are for us. That is what you are for us.
Concerned that maybe I had been dropped from the from the roster,
from your guardianship.
Yeah, exactly.
Dropped from your guardianship. Well, one of your states which you call home, New Jersey, has a bill to end religious exemptions from childhood vaccines. It has collapsed, but the Senate, the Democrats in the Senate, have vowed to fight on.
State Senate President Stephen Sweeney from a county I have spent a great deal of time in said that we will pass this bill. It's about public health, and we are ready to go to war over this. It's a knockdown, drag-out national story out of New Jersey about whether or not people have the right to keep their kids from being vaccinated. Tim, I think it's a public schools issue, really. Without the public schools, you don't have this issue. Private schools are free to demand or not vaccination schedules. But what we have here, I think, is an untenable tension between both sides, and both liberty interests are being infringed upon. On the one hand, you have, let's say, a family that's in favor of vaccinations, and they say, well, you've come and said you have to take my kid out of my home and send him to a government school, and you're going to put them next to somebody who may be have an infectious disease. It's untenable. On the other hand, you have some family who says we don't want to have our kid vaccinated, whether it's based on a religious reason or some other reason, and you have the state saying, oh, no, we're going to put a needle in their arm and put some solution into it because that's what we think is right. And I think, liberty demands that we don't have the public schools so that we don't have these choices to make.
Well, the argument made for universal vaccinations with no exemptions is that vaccinations don't work unless everybody participates. Is that a legitimate argument?
Well, there's something called herd immunity, which is that we all benefit. You can have – there are certain people who can't take the vaccines. Like they medically can't take them. They will die. They will get horrible illnesses. But they enjoy protection from the rest of us having the vaccinations. That's where the herd immunity comes in, where if some significant portion of the herd has the vaccine, then the rest will enjoy the immunity as well because it won't spread. So that's sort of where that argument comes from. And that's a fine argument for encouraging people to just get vaccinated for various things. It's not, I think, a compelling argument for the forced vaccination of others.
Now, one of the things we've talked about repeatedly over the 9 years of this show, Scott, is something called civil asset forfeiture, which basically means when the police stop you and suspect you of a crime, if you are then cleared of any criminal wrongdoing or having done anything.
Let me interrupt you and suggest you want to re-cue that lead in to civil asset forfeiture, because I don't think that's a great lead in. Sorry.
What do you mean?
I mean the way you said it, like when the police accuse you of, it's about them taking your stuff. So you should just say seizing your stuff, I think. Do you know what I mean? It's not about the crime aspect. That's all I meant.
Right. Okay. All right. Now, Scott, over the years, one of the things we've discussed over the 9 years of this program repeatedly is something called civil asset forfeiture. When the police stop you and take your things, take your money, take your clothes, take your personal belongings, whatever, they have claimed over the years that they get to keep that unless you can prove, you have to prove that you did not come to the... Okay, screwed up.
You were actually great there. Yeah, you come to it right, from in an ill-gotten way. Yeah.
Okay, let's go. Scott, one of the things we've talked about many times over the 9 years of this program is something called civil asset forfeiture. And it's a matter of whether police have the right to simply keep your property if they've taken it from you.
That's about the size of it, Tim. They pull you over and say, we think that you've used this car in drug dealing, for instance, and we're going to seize it because you got it from the profits of drug dealing and it's used in drug dealing. Meanwhile, I think most Americans who aren't schooled on this topic would think, well, they would have to first charge you with being a drug dealer and criminally convict you for that before they could successfully seize your property. But that's not the case in many places in the United States. It's not the case. Federal law doesn't prohibit it, and some states do and some states don't. New Jersey has taken a big step forward in protecting their citizens with two bills they've passed that kind of work against that. One is an actual reporting requirement, Tim. Sadly, we don't even know what they're taking. You know, we find out later when if somebody's either has enough money to hire a lawyer to fight for their stuff, or in the case of many of these cases, they get a public interest law firm in order to take their case and recover their funds. But there are innumerable cases that are truly tragic where you have a guy who's like saved up for a landscaping purchase and has thousands of dollars on them because they don't use the banks, and yet that's seen as some kind of indicator of drug activity without any evidence that they've done so. So the reporting requirement will be great because it'll at least allow us to see what they're taking from who and what's the disposition of that property. One of the real tragedies, one of the things that kind of sticks in everybody's craw who monitors this thing is a lot of times they use the property to benefit themselves. And what I mean by that is the police departments themselves will enjoy the fruits of this seizure, whether it's through equipment purchases or other things that they get to enjoy. So they then have a personal motivator to go out and take people's property. The other thing, Tim, is in some classifications of crimes in New Jersey, they will not be able to go forward with civil asset forfeiture unless there is a commensurate criminal conviction. And that, I think, is what liberty demands. If the state can't prove beyond a reasonable doubt that you didn't do it, not only should they not be able to put you behind bars, which is the current law, but also they shouldn't be able to just take your stuff. Because what happens is people cannot – it's not cheap to hire a lawyer to get your stuff back. I mean, this is a crippling event in most people's lives who it happens to. And we should recognize that and act accordingly.
Okay, well, a law requiring mandatory inspections of rental properties has been challenged in another of the states you call home. We talked about New Jersey. Now we're talking about Pennsylvania.
Yeah, we're going around the horn.
Going around the horn. This is Pottstown, PA.
And they won the case. This is a great win for liberty, Tim. You know, I like to bring these stories that I think some people would consider it a small thing or a minor thing, but it's where the rubber meets the road for a lot of people's liberty.
Exactly.
And a lot of towns have enacted these, renters are second-class citizens in so many ways, and that's what this law says, that rental properties should be subject to inspection every 2 years. And what that does is, you can imagine if they just said it for homeowners, that every 2 years a government employee would be entitled to come in and inspect your home. Well, why? Well, for good health and safety. Well, why are renters not in charge of their own good health and safety together with their landlords? It's preposterous that this perfectly legal way of occupying real property somehow entitles the government to invade the space.
Well, I can tell you, Scott, having been a forced member of homeowners associations and a member of one right now, there is certainly there's a caste system. Okay, on that note, thank you, Scott.
Thanks, Tim.
This program, Liberty Nation Radio and LibertyNation.com's own podcasts, The Uprising, hosted by Scott, and The Rabbit Hole, Politics and Prose, where past is prologue. All available on demand at LibertyNation.com and from fine podcast providers everywhere. So that is it for this week, but we'll be back at you next week. Same time, same station. Till then, this is Tim Donner saying, stand up for liberty. And we'll see you next time on Liberty Nation Radio.